Hello and welcome to our series here at the Minneapolis Foundation on the state of Minnesota nonprofits. In January, we spoke with Nonoko Sato, the head of the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits, about the challenges facing the nonprofit sector. Find that chat on our Minneapolis Foundation YouTube page. What we're doing here today is an extension of that conversation as part of the work we do to bring fund holders closer to the work happening on the ground. By highlighting the work of specific nonprofits, we hope fund holders will gain a better understanding of how rapid changes are affecting organizations and be equipped to make your giving more impactful in this moment. My name is Tom Weber, and I'm very pleased to be joined by Jocelyn Wyatt, who is the CEO of Alight, a global organization serving refugees and displaced people. It's also an organization that has its origins in Minnesota. So, Jocelyn, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
So how's your organization doing right now?
Well, Tom, I would say that today things are feeling pretty good. That said, I would say that Alight has experienced the most challenging 6 weeks that at least I have seen in my tenure as CEO. Starting on January 24th, we received notification from our largest donor, the US government, that all of our humanitarian relief programs, as well as those across the board delivered by the State Department and USAID, must be suspended immediately for a 90-day review period. This was incredibly challenging news to receive. The work that Alight does is clearly life-saving. We are running, health clinics and nutrition feeding centers and water and sanitation services for forcibly displaced people and refugees in about 20 countries around the world. We serve about 6 million people a year. And with this notification and this executive order, what it meant for us was that 5 of our programs, all funded by USAID and the State Department, needed to come to an immediate halt. And that felt incredibly challenging for us, as we knew that lives would be lost as a result of stopping to deliver these services. So, for us, that meant about a third of our budget was also funded by the US government. For us, that was about $32 million of funding that was immediately suspended for our work in Sudan, South Sudan, Somalia, Uganda, and Myanmar. So we've been really trying to navigate this crisis over the last month and a half or so. I am incredibly proud of the way that the team has been able to be really adaptive and responsive. And we're going to make it through this. And so, we were one of the organizations that received waivers initially for the emergency life-saving work that we were doing. Then we had a really scary moment where the grants that we had were terminated, and we immediately we're supposed to stop work again. Then a couple of days later, those terminations were rescinded. And now we've sort of gotten the go-ahead. Now that the State Department has confirmed that this review process is complete, we are so fortunate that we are emerging with all 5 of those able to continue work and operations. And so we have not received payment yet from the government for the work that we have completed over the last month and a half or so. And so we're still anxiously awaiting payments as we hope that those are now being processed. But we are really happy that our work is back on at this point in Sudan, South Sudan, Somalia, and Uganda.
And just on that last note, give me just a quick sentence of what is the work actually happening in those countries? What is Alight doing in those countries?
Yeah. So in Sudan, for instance, which is a country that is experiencing war and massive amounts of conflict right now, Alight is the largest healthcare provider across the country. So there we are running primary health clinics across the country where we are providing sort of basic health services to communities that otherwise wouldn't have access to any. We are also providing water and sanitation services in 3 camps for refugees and internally displaced people. And we are running one field hospital for complicated pregnancies for women that need sort of more than what a basic health clinic would offer. And then we are also running these 6 nutrition stabilization centers. So these are for severely malnourished children that need round-the-clock, 24/7 support in terms of oxygen, feeding, etc., so that they don't die. And so that's sort of one an example from Sudan. For Somalia, we're running with U.S. government funding. We're running 13 health clinics that serve about 1,200 people a day. We also serve about 700 kids each day who are malnourished and need that emergency feeding. So those are kind of some of the examples of the type of work that we're doing where, again, even by stopping services for a day, you can imagine, the sort of risk of life that people would experience.
How would you say your organization, even with the kind of the ups and downs that you just described of, is it here, is it not, do we have our funding, do we not? How is your organization functioning differently today and maybe differently permanently than it was, 2 months ago, for example?
Yeah. So unfortunately, the financial implications have been severe, particularly the sort of not knowing. And so what that meant was that in mid-February, we had to reduce the size of our global team. It's about 80 people or so that support the whole of our organization. So Alight's total headcount is about 2,500 staff. The majority of them are really frontline service providers working, in the countries where we're operating. But there's about 80 of us or so that sort of have responsibility for the whole of the organization. We had to reduce that team, the operating costs of that team by about 50%. So it's now been about a month that we have been operating. We had to do some layoffs. We had to do a number of full furloughs and then partial furloughs and salary cuts for the remainder of us. So we have been definitely operating a really, with many fewer people than we previously had at a time when the workload has been even greater as we're trying to kind of navigate this crisis. So that's been sort of one of the big challenges. I think another piece of it on the sort of positive side is that we have done a lot of work in terms of private fundraising from our community of supporters, the majority of whom are in Minnesota. We've been really fortunate that our board and our donors have really stepped up during this time. And we're really thrilled that we have now raised about $3.2 million of a $5 million goal. That was sort of the goal that we set at the beginning of this, which would kind of allow us to be able to make it through this period and continue operating services, even as we sort of navigated these bumps and these temporary suspensions. And then I guess the third thing I would point to is that we have really been doing a lot of advocacy work over the last month and a half. It's been something that Alight has played in a little bit before, but I don't think we've ever been as involved in terms of making our voices heard and encouraging our supporters to do the same as during this period. And so we have been, I've spent 2 weeks now over the last 6 weeks on Capitol Hill in DC, meeting with the Minnesota delegation as well as other congressional representatives and senators. Just really sharing sort of what the on-the-ground human implications have been of this foreign aid freeze. And then we've also been organizing phone banks at our office in Minneapolis, encouraging people to volunteer with us, to call elected officials. We've been doing letter writing campaigns. We've been doing briefing calls anywhere between 1 and 4 times a week for a sort of broader community of people involved in Alight, just to sort of get them up to speed about what this situation has really looked like, and again, what the implications are for our customers, the 6 million people around the world that we serve every day.
Well, as you think about that, and this may be a hard question to answer because of how much things continuously have changed for you in the last several weeks, but what should people know about the work that you will be doing or hope to be doing in the next 3 to 6 months?
Yeah, so really, we are continuing our work. Alight is going to make it through this time. Again, it's been really challenging for us, but thanks to our broad base of private funding supporters, we are going to make it through this. And so, we are committed to continuing to serve our customers, to continue to deliver these life-saving services. I think we recognize more than ever how important the work that we do is. Particularly, what I expect that we're going to see that there's going to be less support, less healthcare, less water and sanitation, fewer services for women and families and others in the geographies that we're working, given that the U.S. government just, cut 83% of all the foreign aid grants that were delivered to organizations like ours. We're really fortunate in that our 5 grants are continuing, but for many organizations, that's not the case. And so I think what we're going to see is around the world, whether it's public health needs for displacement, needs for the most sort of at-risk communities are going to grow greater and greater. I think we also expect that we may see increased levels of conflict in the world. We will certainly continue to see increased levels of displacement due to natural disasters and climate. And so I think the work that Alight does is going to be even more important than ever. And I think it's going to be a challenge for us to be able to secure the resources with lower levels of funding from the US government, with real concerns about sort of what the UN is going to be able to support, with European donors also facing, their own concerns about security. I think it's a question of sort of how we're going to be able to raise the money required to be able to deliver at the scale that warrants the need. And so, we continue to be a really ambitious organization and really committed to serving our customers. And so, we're going to do what we can to raise funding. Though I expect that, we're really going to continue to push on fundraising from, foundations, companies, individuals, because that's sort of where we see that support may come from during these really challenging times.
So the last question is kind of one of those lightning 1 or 2 sentence questions. This is one of your organization is one of those areas where a lot of news coverage has happened about cuts happening. You were talking about the foreign aid and USAID. So in 1 or 2 sentences, just kind of the quick answer, what would you tell people about what is happening with that funding scenario that they may not have picked up or realize if they had only been watching the news or reading stories? What's the thing you've experienced that even maybe surprised you in just kind of a quick sentence or 2?
To me, I think I've spent my career thinking that, the government moves too slowly and is overly bureaucratic and sort of hard to understand, like, why did it need to be this way? This felt, like the government was really a challenging partner to work with. And now that I've seen government move really quickly in the last 6 weeks, and to move in ways that are not as maybe thoughtful or considered, and to see what the implications are for our customers, our staff, our organization, to go between suspension, termination, back on, back off, payments, not payments, you can do this, you can't do this, da, da, da. It makes me have a lot more empathy and understanding of why government should move more slowly and deliberately, because the implications of not doing so are truly life-threatening, in the case of our work and the experience that we've had in the last month and a half.
Well, Jocelyn Wyatt from Alight, Minnesota based company here. Thank you so much for your insight and sharing with all of us here today.
Thanks so much, Tom. Really appreciate it.
We appreciate you joining us, and we invite our fund holders to connect with their philanthropic advisors if you have further questions about how this organization or the area of work it performs might affect you, and you might want to learn more. We're excited to work with you to find a plan for something that works best for you. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you in the video.
Thanks so much.